What's going on YouTube? JayzTwoCents here, and I want to point out it's JayzTwoCents, not J2Cent or JayzTwoCents. It's just JayzTwoCents. I mean, why is that so hard? But we are fast approaching the warm months of summer, and in some climates get super freaking hot, and that's when I notice a lot of questions come my way about very specific things when it comes to water cooling. So this summer we're going to try and touch on all of that. We're going to rehash some old topics, and we're going to do something that I've never actually done on this channel. We are going to talk about pump speed and does it matter. Today we're just going to perform a test here on Skunkworks, and we're going to see what happens in my scenario when it comes to pump speed. That ought to be fun. But before we start playing with our pumps, let's go ahead and talk about today's sponsor, and that is squarespace.com/JayzTwoCents. Now last year I used Squarespace's online e-commerce tools to sell some custom writing jerseys, and if you guys bought one, kudos to you. If you didn't, sorry, they were a limited run, but I had no idea where to start and how to actually run any sort of an e-commerce site. And Squarespace made it freakishly easy with online inventory tracking, order tracking. You can even export to spreadsheets and keep track of everything you need to know, and even get inventory alerts when things start to get low and sell out. So if you're interested in getting your own website, then head on over to squarespace.com/JayzTwoCents and use offer code JayzTwoCents to get 10% off your order. And if you sign up for a year, you get a domain absolutely free. Now, inevitably what happens every time we talk about radiators, water pumps, and water cooling in computers is people want to compare it to things like automotive cooling when it comes to radiators and thermostats and water pumps. And the thing is, you can't directly compare that. You're talking about very low temperatures here, very low pressures, whereas in a car you're dealing with huge delta temperatures between ambient temp and the coolant temp reaching, over 220 degrees Fahrenheit in many conditions. Obviously our coolant here isn't getting anywhere near that hot, so you really can't compare the two. It just isn't directly comparable. So what inevitably happens is you start to hear things on forums along the lines of, well, if you run your pump too slow, the coolant's gonna move too slow through the loop, and the coolant's gonna touch the block too long, and it's gonna get really hot. So if you really think about that, the flip side would be, so the coolant is gonna stay in the radiator longer and cool off more. So on the flip side though, the other side of the argument is, well, if your pump's moving too fast, then the coolant is moving through the radiator too quickly and it's not going to cool down fast enough. Now pretty much both of those scenarios are true in the sense of when they talk about the timing of fluid flow, where yes, it's going to sit in the blocks a little bit longer, it's going to hopefully pick up some heat, but it's going to sit in the radiator longer as well. If you run it really fast, it's going to make more passes per minute across, if you were to say, be able to track this one molecule right inside the loop, and time how many times it went around the entire loop per minute, yeah, there would be more times per minute, which is going to mean it's going to run through the radiator more. And in the end of the day, running it slower or running it faster tends to give you about the same result. And that's what I'm going to hopefully show you guys here today. Hopefully physics aren't going to change suddenly and I'm going to be making out to look like a liar. And even if that's true, it will stay in the video because this, again, is all about facts here. I like to deal with facts. They're fun to deal with, actually. You can't really change those. So here's what we're gonna do right now. I'm gonna load up Heaven Benchmark on my 3-way Titan-X water loop, which gets really hot. It's running a D5, it's independent from the CPU, so there's actually no contamination of temperature between anything happening with the CPU and the VRMs and the GPU. So this is actually gonna be a pretty controlled test here. Now it's 3 Titan-X's with a 560 radiator and a 280 radiator, running a 250 millimeter reservoir, and then again, as I said, a variable speed D5. That's a manual control, not a PWM, so I'm actually gonna control it. I'm gonna do a control here where I let the test run for about 10 minutes in Heaven, let the heat get nice and built up in the system, and then we're gonna log what the max temperature was, and then I'm gonna let the system completely idle for about a half hour. I'm gonna cool off the room, open the windows, let the hot air get out of here, and start all over from the same ambient temp, and then we're gonna move the speed of the pump to 100%, and then we're gonna compare the results and see exactly what happened. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the results. Well, for me, it'll be a while, but for you, it'll be like right now. Now, just so you know what you guys are looking at, this is what we care about right here. These are the 3 Titan-X's, as you can see, 35, 32, and 35. They're running a bit warmer at idle because I do have the 3 panels hooked up, so they do go up a little bit higher on their base clock. As you can see right there on core clock, they're running at 1,000 megahertz right now, so they're not ramped down to idle. That's why the temperature is a little warmer. So we don't really care about the minimum. We care about the maximum, which is right now 35C. So I'm gonna go ahead and run Heaven Benchmark, and then we're gonna see, like I said, after the system gets fully heated up, And the settings on here, we're gonna push it. We've got it running a 3440 by 1440p panel. Tessellation, I'm gonna go ahead and put that on extreme. And then anti-aliasing, I'm leaving at 2x. And before I start the test, one other thing I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna take fan speed out of the equation. I don't want it speeding up and slowing down. So I've set my fan static to 70% inside of speed fans. So that's our constant right now. The only thing we want changing is going to be the actual speed of the pump. We don't want the load to change on the software, and we don't want the fan speed to change because that can obviously impact our results. So here's the first result right here. 63C was the hottest GPU temp. As you can see, the loads were pretty consistent. Temperatures had stabilized, they weren't still going up. So that was our max temperature, 63, which might lead you to go, wow, that's really hot for water-cooled card. Yeah, it actually really is. And obviously the pump is running really, really slow. So what we're gonna do now is I'm going to go ahead, let the system completely cool off. As you can see, it's taken a little while to come down. Water-cooled systems take time for the temperature to drop. We're gonna ramp that pump up to 100%, and then we're gonna see exactly what we get after that. All right, so there's the new result, 56C. That came down from what, 63? So that's 7C difference by just changing the pump speed. Yeah, obviously there's a reason why that happens. So let's go ahead and talk about that, because that's the thing a lot of people leave out, is there's a lot of variables that lead to these temperature fluctuations. All right, so let's talk here about what just happened. Some people might look at this conclusion and go, oh, that's a set conclusion across the board. Higher pump speed equals lower temp, done, ship it. Doesn't really work that way, guys. You have to understand, in my system, it's a bit of an extreme situation here where I am trying to get as far on one end of the spectrum as I can and as far as I can on the other end of the spectrum to see what the measurable difference is. And between that wide of a gap, I only saw 7 difference. Now, I'm not going to say 7 is a bad number. 7 is actually a very, very good number when it comes to temperature difference between just changing the pump speed. But remember, in my system, I've got 3 Titanexes that are running in a parallel config, which means each one of those cards is only getting 1/3 of the flow rate entering through this tube right here. So it's going to divide between all 3 cards, and then it's going to recollect as it leaves all 3 cards and go back to the pump. So really, my pumps being at max speed right here means that my cards are only getting 1/3 of that max speed, if that makes sense. So the reason why the temperatures were so high when I had the pump set to 0, and 0 actually being the lowest setting, it doesn't mean off, is because 1/3 of the lowest flow rate of this D5 with a 560 radiator and 3 blocks and another 280 radiator on the back, and then of course all of the fittings and bends, meant that the flow rate going through these 3 GPUs was very, very low. Probably just a trickle level of low. So what was happening is the fluid wasn't moving fast enough to actually cool off the graphics cards effectively or efficiently. So what I said in the beginning was one of the arguments is if the pump is moving too slow, then the coolant sits there too long and gets too hot and it doesn't pull the heat out of the GPU fast enough, is partially true. Now again, remember, this situation I'm talking about here is specifically because of my 3-way parallel config. Now, most of the time, you're not going to see a huge difference in temperatures between lowest setting and highest setting in a single GPU and even a double or SLI GPU configuration or a Crossfire, depending on what you're running, because of the fact that you're not going to see as much of a flow drop-off. Again, my loop here having multiple radiators and 3 GPUs is a lot of resistance for a D5 to have to overcome. So if I had only had 1 or 2 cards in here, I would have expected the results to be a little bit more narrow and not as big of a difference there. Now, one thing to keep in mind though is when you run water cooling pumps at their max speed, they tend to get pretty noisy. So there's going to be a trade-off there where you're going to really have to think about, is the noise factor of running a pump at max speed. D5s aren't too bad, believe it or not, and mine's actually isolated with rubber mounts, so it's not really transferring vibration to the case or the desk. I can't feel the case with my hand right next to it right here. Some pumps actually will create vibrations that just resonate and sound terrible. DDC pumps are a perfect example. A DDC pump at max speed is incredibly loud. So you're going to want to keep that in mind as well. But if you guys are struggling with higher temps than you would like in your loop and you've got your pump running a lower speed, try finding a sweet spot where the noise and the performance is going to help you. But ultimately, I wouldn't look at pump speed as being the kind of thing that is going to make a huge difference when it comes to the overall effectiveness of your loop. That's one of the reasons why I don't run PWM pumps. I like to have manual control over those, and I tend to set it and forget it, and I usually don't have temperature issues. Now, if you're running a config with a multi-speed pump or variable speed pump, why don't you sound off in the comments and tell people what your results have been? That way you can kind of get a collection of data down there so people can learn from not just my results, but your results as well. Remember, on setups like this, and yours and other people's, mileage is going to vary. Not your mileage may vary, your mileage will vary. Anyway, thanks for watching today's video here. Again, this is not a conclusive, this can be applied to all systems. You're gonna have to play with yours. You're gonna have to play with yours and see exactly what feels good, if you know what I'm saying. But you're gonna have to determine for yourself what's best for your system. Again, ambient temperatures are a factor. Airflow in the room is a factor. As the room heats up, the loop's gonna get hotter. It doesn't just stay. It's going to be dependent on the air cooling the radiators. A lot of people forget room ventilation is as important as your case ventilation. Anyway, time to go, guys. Thanks for watching today's video. I hope you've enjoyed. Hope you've learned something. And as always, I will see you in the next one.